East Berlin was an interesting place. We were traveling to Berlin to stay in the west side, of course, from Frankfurt on the train. Now, in those days, Germany was still divided into two sections, East Germany and West Germany. And we, to this point, had always traveled in West Germany. East Germany was controlled, well, theoretically by the East Germans, but in reality by the USSR, which is also no longer in existence. Now is mostly Russia. They were really the folks behind the East German totalitarian government. And the government closed off all of the parts that they controlled, which was a substantial portion of Eastern Germany, and included the area all around the city of Berlin, which was the capital, historically the capital, and now still again the capital. And Berlin itself was also divided up, so that part of Berlin, which what had been originally under the control of the Americans, the British, and the French after World War II, and Germany, in Russia turned over their portion to the East Germans, and the rest of it remained free and open. So we took the train into Berlin, night train. We typically would do the night trains because we could sleep on the train and it was cheaper that way. And I remember that the train appeared to stop at every station in East Germany on the way to Berlin. But nobody was allowed to get on the train or off the train at any of these stations, at least not that I could tell. And yet we would make the stops. And now one of the stops in the middle of the night, I decided to see if I could figure out what's going on. So I stuck my head out the window to look up and down the train. Well, I noticed that there were armed East German guards on both sides of the train, and I could see at least one per train car, but there may have been more, and every other one in the row had a dog, like a German Shepherd or something. And when that guard saw me with my head out the window, he yelled at me in Russian and began to take his weapon off his shoulder, and it was clear to me that I wasn't supposed to have my head out the door. So I went back in. Anyway, you have to remember that people were shot all the time trying to get out of East Germany. So these guys were serious. We got into Berlin, staying in the west side, and Berlin was, because it's surrounded by enemies all the time, it was kind of a city on the edge and had lots and lots of things going on. It was had a real nightlife, party city. You know, they were really had lots of energy in that city. It was really a wonderful place. I understand Berlin is still a great place to visit, but I haven't been back since before the wall came down. Anyway, we went into East Berlin a few times. One time we took the tourist bus in, and the bus would go in and go by all the stores that they had set up to show Westerners how well they were doing. And the reality was, none of the stuff in the stores that we saw was actually for sale, either to us or to the Germans. It was merely there for show. The interesting thing about the bus trip, tourist trip, was we went in and out of East Berlin through Checkpoint Charlie. Checkpoint Charlie was sort of a famous spot used in a bunch of spy novels and movies and stuff, and it was because most of the prisoner exchanges that were done in those days were done at Checkpoint Charlie. So it was kind of a well-known location. And one of the things the East Germans told us when we went into Checkpoint Charlie is you can't take any pictures. So of course I took pictures. I don't think any of them came out, or I mean they're not. You can't see anything on them. It's sort of silly. Um, and then the other times we went in, we took the overhead train, kind of like a subway, but it was elevated train like they see in places like Chicago. And this was a transportation system that went all the way around Berlin, both east and west. It was very cheap. It was run by the East Germans, so a lot of the West Germans wouldn't ride on it. But we were poor students, and so and didn't have as much of an issue for us, although it probably wasn't. We used the train to get in there, and then you get into the East Berlin side, and the guards were kind of they would hassle us pretty good going in, check through everything. They all had automatic weapons. They pushed us along pretty quick through the line. It was really kind of it was definitely very rude and whatever. They also made us exchange some money. We had to exchange 5 West German marks for 5 East German marks. Now, that wasn't really a big deal. It wasn't a terrible deal. 5 West German marks in those days was $1.25. So we had to give $1.25 basically to the East Germans, and they gave us East German money back, which was worth about 30 cents. And every time you went into East Germany, you had to do this exchange. It was kind of silly. And then you couldn't take the money out. But we tried the first time, and they wouldn't let us take it out. We had to stick it in a, they said, do whatever you want with it. You can stick it in that Red Cross folder, Red Cross thing if you want. And we looked over there, and the jar for Red Cross was overfilled, and it was flowing. It was everywhere because everybody else was in the same boat. So they had this massive, I don't think it went to Red Cross. It probably went back in the pockets of the guards. But nevertheless, first time through, that's what I did. The second time through, I said, to hell with you, and I just told them I spent all the money, and I just kept the 5 East German mark note, which is probably worth maybe 50 cents now, but it was still pretty cool. So I somewhere have a very nice, pretty much uncirculated 5 Fünf East German mark. Anyway, one of the times we were there, we wandered around, and you could still see buildings that were being held. The walls were still being held up with wood and stuff, and rubble was still on the streets, and the streets were blocked out. Now, this was 20 years after World War II, and yet there were areas that clearly were left over from the war, and they have not done anything with it all. We stopped in a small little, I guess it was a grocery or something when we were there one time, just where we spent our money one time. And I bought a sandwich, which was terrible, and a warm beer. It was called Hell beer, but it, for 30 cents, a sandwich and a beer wasn't too bad, even if they weren't very good. And then we had to go back one more time into East Berlin. We were getting ready to leave West Berlin to head to Hamburg, because we were then headed north up to Denmark. When the hotel clerk realized that the visa that Steve bought was not the right visa. And what happens is, when we went into the country on the train in the middle of the night, the customs people come on at one point, and you have to buy a visa. They insisted to have a visa to go into East Germany, which is, not uncommon. And there was a price, and, it wasn't too bad, and we got the visa, and they stamped our things and everything. Well, they also asked us in German which way we were going out. If we were going out the same way or whatever, because they wanted to have his buyer visas now rather than have to buy them on the way out. It saved the customs guys some time. Well, I knew what he said, and we got the right visas because I said, no, we're not leaving that. We're not going that. We're going back to Hamburg, so he gave us a different visa. But Steve had no idea what they were saying and ended up with the visa going back to Frankfurt, so he couldn't take the train with us. So we had to go back in and fight East German communist bureaucracy. We were really dreading this. First place, the good news was it was the word for visa in German is visa, so we didn't have too much trouble trying to find it, other than the fact the first guy I asked when we got to East Germany answered me in kind of a funny language. I had no idea what he said. So I asked him again, and he told me he didn't speak German. He was Czechoslovakian. So, okay, well, that didn't help. So the next person I stopped actually spoke pretty good English, and she helped direct us to the visa office. The thing that's interesting is when you're in those communist countries, people don't want to talk to you. So it was a little difficult to get somebody to, you can get eye contact or try to stop somebody asking questions. They didn't want anything to do with you because they were afraid they were being spied on. If they're talking to some Americans, they might get questioned about it, blah, blah, blah. So we did eventually find the visa office, and when we got there was a piece of cake, and the visa changed. It was easier than it would have been in an American place, I think, or certainly as easy. So we got the visa changed, and we were then successfully able to leave and head back out on our way to Denmark. One of the other things that happened while we were in East Berlin is we went to the Brandenburg Gates. Now, the Brandenburg Gates are this big monument that traditionally sits in the middle of the city of Berlin. And but at this point, it sort of just barely made it into East Berlin. And so to look at it, it was best to look at it from the East Berlin side, because on the West Berlin side, there was a big wall and whatever. You couldn't see it very well. So we were over there, and we were standing and looking at the gates and taking pictures and, just kind of spending some time there. And we noticed there was another young couple with a kid. Their child must have been about, I don't know, 5 years old, something like that. And he's just playing around like kids do, and nobody's paying much attention. And, it's barricaded off. Big signs, you're not supposed to go beyond the barricade, and there are armed guards right there who, basically are told if you see anybody trying to get through here, you need to shoot them. And that happens all the time. People are trying to get out of East Germany through East Berlin, and there are people who run right through and try to get over the barbed wire and the wall and everything and get shot. I mean, eventually they got smarter and they started using tunnels and other things to get over. But nevertheless, we're standing there watching, and the child crawls under the barricade, which was not a big deal to do for a 5-year-old, and is playing on the other side. Well, all of a sudden, this East German guard unshoulders his automatic weapon and yells in German for this kid to stop. So he is about to shoot this 5-year-old because the 5-year-old went on the wrong side of the barricade. Now, this East German guard, who's probably 18 himself, knows fully well that, that this is an accidental kind of thing. He can see what's going on. But he has orders to shoot people, and he literally was going to shoot this kid. So he unwinds his rifle and yells at the kid to stop. And at that point, Mom sees her child and realizes in an instant what's going on and screams bloody murder. And her child turned and ran to her, coming back underneath the barricade and back into East Germany and away from no man's land. And everybody there including that guard, breathed a big sigh of relief because this incident had, deflated at that point, and it was nice that nobody got injured and things ended well. But anyway, that was spooky. That was just spooky.